Hello, Adams. This is Miss Kovarik, and we are on Unit 8, Lesson 8 today. We're going to read a chapter called The Man on the Island. And here is your vocab. Outlandish is an adjective that means odd, unusual, or bizarre. A dell is a small, secluded, that means like there's nothing around it. A valley with trees and grass. Treacherous is an adjective, which means dangerous or difficult to handle. A shipwreck is a verb, and that means to cause a passenger or crew member to experience the destruction of a ship. Desolate is an adjective, lacking people, plants, animals, and other things that make a place feel welcoming. Union Jack is the official flag of Great Britain. Stockade is a barrier made up of upright posts used for protection or defense. And then scout is a verb that means to explore an area to find information about it. So we're reading chapter 5 today, which is called The Man on the Island. Excuse me. At first, Treasure Island seemed a fascinating place. There were marshes full of willows and odd, outlandish, swampy plants and trees. Here and there I saw snakes, and one raised his head from a rock and hissed at me with a noise not unlike that of a spinning top. I explored for a while until I wandered into the thicket of live oak trees, which grew along the sand. Suddenly, a wild duck flew up into the air, followed by another, and soon, over the whole surface of the marsh, a great cloud of birds hung screaming and circling in the sky above us. I guessed that some of my shipmates must be drawing near. I listened and heard voices, faint but growing louder. I got down on all fours and crawled until I could see down into a little green dell beside the marsh, closely set about with trees. There, Long John Silver and a seaman named Tom stood face to face in conversation. It was clear that Silver was testing Tom, trying to find out if he would join the mutiny. "I'll not be led away," said Tom. "I'd sooner lose my hand. If I forget my duty—" All of a sudden, he was interrupted. Far away out in the marsh arose an angry roar, then another. Tom jumped at the sound like a horse prickled by a rider's spurs, but Silver winked not an eye. He stood resting lightly on his crutch, watching his companion like a snake about to strike. "John," said Tom, "what was that?" "That," said Silver with a treacherous smile. "Oh, I reckon that was Alan." Then Tom seemed to understand everything all at once. "Alan," he cried, fearing the worst for his friend. "Well, John Silver, you're no mate of mine, and that's a fact. I'll have no part in your mutiny." With that, the brave fellow turned his back on the cook and set off toward the beach. But he was not destined to go far. With a cry, Silver seized the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch from under his armpit, and sent the missile hurling through the air. It struck poor Tom right between the shoulders in the middle of his back. His hands flew up, he let out a gasp, and fell. I felt faint. The whole world seemed to swim before me in a whirling mist. When I gathered my courage to look again, I saw Silver standing next to Tom, who was motionless on the ground. A moment later, Silver pulled out a whistle and blew upon it. I guessed he was calling the other pirates, but I was worried they might find me. I crawled out of the undergrowth and ran as fast as I could. It was all over for me, I thought. I would be captured by the mutineers. I ran without knowing where I was going until a new alarm brought me to a standstill. With a thumping heart, I saw a dark, shaggy figure leap behind a tree trunk. Was it a bear or a monkey? I could not tell, but I was afraid because I was now cut off on both sides. Behind me were the ferocious pirates, and in front of me the lurking creature. The figure flitted from trunk to trunk like a deer, but it ran on two legs like a man. I was tempted to cry for help when another sighting reassured me that the creature was indeed a man. I took some comfort in this discovery, and in the fact I had just remembered I carried a pistol in my pocket. I put one hand on my pistol and took a few steps forward. At that precise moment, the man leapt out into the open, threw himself on his knees, and held out his hands as if begging for mercy. I could see that he was an Englishman like myself, but his clothes were old and tattered, and his skin had been burned by the sun. In fact, his bright eyes looked quite startling on a face so burned. "Who are you?" I demanded. "I'm Ben Gunn, I am," he replied. His voice sounded like a rusty lock. "I haven't spoken with a man for 3 years. I am surprised I still know how to speak." 3 years, I cried. "Were you shipwrecked here?" "Nay, friend," he said. "I was marooned." I had heard the word, and I knew it stood for a horrible kind of punishment common enough among buccaneers. It was my understanding that when a person is marooned, he is abandoned on a desolate island with not so much to rely on other than his wits. So there is Ben Gunn and Jim. "Marooned 3 years ago," continued the man. "I've lived on goats, berries, and oysters, but my heart longs for English food. At night I dream of cheese." At this time he had been looking at me and smiling. He seemed to take a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jim Hawkins," I told him. "Well now, Jim," he said, "if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways and the company I keep. I'm a changed man. And Jim," he continued, looking around and lowering his voice to a little bit more than a whisper, "I'm rich. You'll thank your lucky stars you win, and that you was the first that found me." Then a shadow passed over his face, and he took a hold of my hand and raised one finger threatening before my eyes. "Now, Jim," he said, "tell me true. Is that Flint's ship you came on?" "No," I replied, "it's not Flint's ship. Flint is dead, but we have some of his men with us." "Not a man with one leg?" he gasped. "John Silver," I said. "Yes, that were his name," he said anxiously. After talking with Ben for a few minutes, I no longer feared him. In fact, I told him the story of our voyage, and he heard it with the keenest of interest. "Well," he said, "you and your friends are in a pinch, aren't you?" "Well, never mind. Just put your trust in Ben Gunn, but tell me one thing. Is this squire of yours an honest man?" "Yes," I said. "Suppose I gave him a share of my money. Do you think he would let me sail home with you?" he asked. "I'm sure he would," I replied. He seemed greatly relieved to hear this. "Well, then," he went on, "I'll tell you my story. I was on Flint's ship when he buried his treasure. He went ashore on this very island with 6 strong men. They were ashore nearly a week and left the rest of us on the ship. Eventually, Flint came back all by himself. There he was, and the 6 men all dead. How he done it, not a man on board could make out. Billy Bones was mate back then, and Silver was also part of his crew. Then, 3 years back, I was on another ship and we sighted this island. 'Boys,' said I, 'this is where Flint buried his treasure. Let's go ashore and find it.' 12 days we spent looking for it, and then the others gave up and went back aboard. 'As for you, Benjamin Gunn,' they say, 'here's a musket, a spade, and a pickaxe. You can stay here and find Flint's money for yourself.' Well, Jim, that's my story. Now be a good lad and run and speak with the squire. Tell him I know this island like it's my own." "How am I to get back on the ship?" I asked. "You can use my boat," he said. "I made it with my own 2 hands. I keep it under a white rock along the shore." Then, quite suddenly, we heard the boom of a cannon. "They've begun to fight," I cried. We stayed together in the undergrowth, unaware of time passing, listening to the sound of cannon and pistol fire. Eventually, I decided I should make my way toward the anchorage. Ben agreed to accompany me. At some point along the way, we spotted a Union Jack fluttering above the trees. "That must be your friends," said Ben Gunn. "It can't be," I said, stunned by the sight of the flag. "They're on the ship. That must be Silver or one of the other mutineers." "Not likely," said Ben Gunn. "In a place like this, where nobody puts in but gentlemen of fortune, Silver would fly the Jolly Roger. You see, Jim, just over that hill is an old stockade. Flint built it many years ago. I reckon that your friends have retreated to the stockade and Silver has the ship." "Well," I said, "if it is really them, then I should try to help." "I'll not go with you," said Ben Gunn. "Not till I've had an opportunity to meet with the squire in private. If he wants to talk, tell him where he can find me and to come with a white flag to show he means well." At that moment, a cannonball came whizzing through the trees and tore up the sand not 100 yards away from us. I ran one way and Ben Gunn ran another. After parting with Ben Gunn, I decided to assess the situation. First, I went to check on the Hispaniola. I saw that she was still anchored in the same place, but now she was flying the Jolly Roger. It seemed that the pirates had indeed taken over the ship. Next, I scouted the shoreline. I spotted a big white rock, and I figured it must be the rock beneath which Ben Gunn hid his boat. Then I made my way through the woods until I came to the stockade, a plain log house surrounded by a tall fence. I saw that Ben Gunn had been right. My friends were in the stockade with the Union Jack flying above them. I called out to them and was warmly welcomed. They told me their story and I told them mine. When fighting broke out on the ship, they had decided they would be safer on the island, so they escaped in 2 of the landing boats with some guns and supplies. They had heard about the stockade. When the pirates saw them rowing away, they fired on them from the ship, and then attacked the stockade. Old Red Ruth had been killed, and another one of our loyal men, Gray, had been injured. After telling my story, I had a chance to look about me. The stockade was made of trunks of pine. Near the door of the stockade was a little spring that welled up and provided fresh water. There was a small chimney in the roof, through which only a little smoke found its way out. The rest stayed in the house and kept us coughing. If we had been allowed to sit idle, we should have fallen into the blues, but Captain Smollett divided us into watches. The doctor questioned me about Ben Gunn. Do you think he is sane, Ben? Jim? I'm not quite sure. He seems a little strange. Well, said the doctor, you can't expect a man who has spent 3 years on a deserted island to be as clear-minded as you or me. We had very little in the way of supplies, and the captain was worried. He thought our best hope was to get the better of the buccaneers. They had lost 4 men, and 2 others were wounded. This says, on an uninhabited island, like the one on which Captain Flint buried his treasure, a stockade usually built by stalking tall wooden fence posts into the ground provides a structure for protection or capture. In Treasure Island, the stockade provides a barrier to slow down the mutinous attack. Similar forts could be used to hold prisoners as well. Okay, long chapter today. You have some written response questions for reading today, so I'm going to read them. Please make sure you are using race to answer your questions. You are referring back to the text when it asks you to. So, number 1, how does the reader know the exchange between John Silver and the seaman takes place? So the reader knows because. Why is the interaction important? 2 parts. Why do they know that Silver and Tom are arguing, fighting? And why is it important? What do you think Ben Gunn means when he says, if I ever get back to England, I'm changing my ways and the company I keep? So what does he mean by that quote? If he gets back to England, he's changing his ways and the company I keep. What does that mean? Number 3, do you think Ben Gunn is a trustworthy character? Support your opinion with evidence from the text. So you're going to say, Ben Gunn is or is not a trustworthy character, and then you need to support it. So let's say blank. You can give me a quote. Or you can say, when Ben does this. So tell me something that Ben does, something Ben says, something the text says that supports whether you think Ben should be trusted or not. And lastly, based on what you have read, would you characterize buccaneers or pirates as trustworthy or untrustworthy? So you're going to say pirates are trustworthy or untrustworthy because blank. What happens in the story that tells you that they are able to be trusted or not able to be trusted? All right, so use those sentence starters for your reading questions, and we're going to head over to skills. When you're ready, you can pause me and then press play when you're ready for skills. So first, we're going to do a little bit of word work. Next, I scouted the shoreline. To scout means to explore an area to find information about it. And another example would be, we will scout the beach for seashells. So I want you guys to write the word in a sentence. So you're going to say, I scouted blank looking for blank. So my example was, I scouted the beach looking for seashells. You're going to do something else. So think of a place and think of what you would look for at that place. Number 2, what part of speech is scout? Is it a noun, adjective, verb, or adverb? And then finally, we're going to do your introduction paragraph. So you're going to go ahead and click this link, and it's going to take you to this Google form, which is your planning. So down here, you answer questions about your setting, the problem, the conflict, a challenge your characters would face, and how the problem would be solved. So you have done all of the work. If you completed this Google form, all you have to do now is put this information together to create an introduction paragraph. So here's an example introduction paragraph. And these are the 3 things that your introduction should have. You need to introduce your characters. You need to name and describe the setting. And you need to do something to hook the reader's attention. So you want to make your readers interested in your story, and so they keep on reading to figure out what's going to happen. So here is your example that you can base yours on. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the other gentlemen have asked me to record the story of Treasure Island, keeping nothing back but the bearings, because there is still treasure there. Therefore, I take upon my pen and go back to the time when my family ran the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the old seaman with the saber cut on his cheek came to stay with us. So they named the characters. We've got the squire, the doctor, other gentlemen. They named the setting. They're at the Admiral Benbow Inn. They also named the setting of the Treasure Island they are going to be at later in the story. They hooked the reader's attention a couple times. So they're saying there is still treasure there. So that makes the reader say, I wonder where the treasure is. They also introduce this unknown character at the end, which can make the reader really want to keep reading and find out more. So at least 3 sentences, that means 3 or more. You must do these 3 things in your introduction paragraph. So again, use what you planned here, put it all together, and give me an introduction paragraph. Any questions or any help you need, get on Zoom office hours, get on the live lesson, and we will be glad to help you out. Have a great day, Adams. I'll see you next time.